Hello, greetings once again, literature lovers, and welcome to the latest installment of Literary Devices of the Stars. Today, we're going to talk about character and characterization in fiction primarily, but the same principles apply to nonfiction writing as well. So let's go ahead and do a little share screen, and we will jump into this right now. Okay. And so there we go. I think. Yeah, there we go. All right. So character and characterization. So my cheeky little subtitle is The Art of Creating the Who. So you'll recall that we talked about the fact that in every plotting element relative to fiction works, short fiction, novel length stuff, and drama, we have a protagonist or main character. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through these specific elements relative to character and characterization. So, denotatively, a fictional character is a person or conscious entity we imagine to exist within the world of a work of fiction or story or play or film. And so we say the conscious entity because occasionally it's not a person at all. It could be animals. It could be supernatural beings, things of that nature. So think of it as again the sort of conscious entity. So here I've given you an example from the eponymous character David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. So he then is the central character there. So let's talk about character in terms of types. So the first type is going to be a round character. Second is flat. The third is stock. And then we're going to talk about the various elements relative to characters and the way they change or don't over the course of a work of literature. So we have dynamic and static. Okay, so let's talk first about round characters. All right, so this is a character who is presented in depth through narration and dialogue. So when we're talking about the narration, each of these stories generally is going to have a narrator of some sort. Sometimes it's in first person. Most often it's some variation of a third person narrator. So this is an example from the J.R.R. Tolkien trilogy, and this is the Fellowship of the Ring. So this is Bilbo Baggins, and so he is presented in depth. I mean, he is the character, sort of the axle around which the stories then revolve. Okay, so the audience comes to understand the character's thoughts and behaviors, and so then the audience perceives the round character as a fully realized individual, and that's part of the point of the writer, especially when we are talking about realism. Okay. All right. So as we talked about relative to the protagonist, the audience then becomes engaged relative to whatever's going to happen to the round character. And again, generally we're talking about your main character here. Okay. All right. So here's the test that you would give to a round character. And this comes from E.M. Forster, who is a noted narratologist, and his book, Aspects of the Novel, groundbreaking piece of work relative to narrative theory. And that is, how is it exactly that narrative works? We know that as human beings, we are storytellers from the very beginning. We have evidence of this relative to things like cave paintings, and then the oral tradition that then lent itself and evolved into writing things down. Okay, so as Forster says here, the test of a round character is whether it is capable of surprising in a convincing way. If it never surprises, it is flat. Okay, so a simple way to look at this is going to be the sort of acid test is, does this character have the ability to change? It's not always that the character wants to change per se, but they find themselves in need of change in order to to better interact with the people around them or the other characters around them, and maybe the world at large. Okay, so a flat character. So I'm giving the example here. This is a Glenn Close playing the character of Gertrude in William Shakespeare's tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. So they are distinguished by a lack of detail in presentation. Now, there may be elements of their speech or mannerisms or actions and so forth that are consistent, but are not necessarily detailed or nuanced. Okay, so shown by the author as having just one or two traits. Generally, this is done because the main character, who's our focal character, is the one that we care about. And so if all the characters are undergoing an array of changes and so forth, it then blunts our ability to really care about the focal character in a story. Okay, so undergoes no significant growth or changes. Okay, and they are generally designed to create or to support the main character. You will hear the term, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead of myself here, the term foil. So it is a character then whose attributes are then say held up in reflection or opposition to comparison with the main character. Okay, so stock character. So this is a conventional character or even say a stereotype. So this might be the say a Jewish grandmother. It might be the overbearing boss. It might be the sort of crazy uncle. The domineering father, the overprotective mother. Okay, so these are all examples of stock characters. So because they've been established by authors, the readers then the audience is meant to essentially distill or crystallize their attributes into a type that then has a meaning, a relationship relative to the more dynamic and more fully developed characters that are in the narrative. Okay, so we're talking about a stock response. That means that when we are confronted, say, with an evil character, our stock response is to be, say, repelled by them, things of that nature. Okay, so some examples is going to be the villain, the wicked stepmother, the strict and silent father, the wise old man, this type of thing. Okay, all right. Now, dynamic character. So generally speaking, your round character, your protagonist, and here I'm giving a pictorial representation of Elizabeth Bennet from Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice. So she is not only a round character, we get the sort of fully developed sense of who Elizabeth Bennet is, but she's dynamic in the sense that she changes. Okay, so again, typically a central character, often the protagonist, and they experience internal changes with these attitudes or behaviors over the story's arc. Okay. All right. Now, static characters. So I'm using images from the same BBC version of Pride and Prejudice. There to your left is Mr. Wickham, and to the right is Lydia Bennet, who then became Lydia Wickham. So static characters. So though the character may undergo, say, physical change. So Lydia, over the course of the novel, which lasts, about a year, she's 1 year older. She is, 15, 16, and undergoes, some physical changes. But in terms of there's no significant change in the way that this character thinks, what their attitudes are, the way that they act, the way that they speak. Okay, so again, serve as a foil for the central character or protagonist. Okay, someone against whom we're going to balance certain traits. Okay, now how does characterization occur? So in other words, how does the writer go about affecting this sort of literary element? How do they go about doing it? So Characterization then is the representation of persons, okay, generally in or narrative or a consciousness in a narrative and dramatic work. And it happens in two main ways. One is direct, and the other then is going to be indirect. Okay, so I'll give you an example of direct characterization. So there's a picture of Thomas Hardy, a very famous English writer whose characters are unbelievably memorable in the same way that that say Leo Tolstoy's, Dostoevsky's characters are memorable. You know, Alice Walker's characters, say in The Color Purple, and this sort of thing. Okay, so direct characterization features elements such as the attribution of qualities in physical and psychological description by the narrator. So, in other words, the narrator is telling us about the consciousness, the entity in question. Okay, so that we don't have to necessarily guess at things. All right, and so then the character will then comment on themselves. So, for example, David Copperfield at the beginning tells us that, hey, listen, I'm getting ready to narrate my own life, and not sure how my life's going to turn out. Okay, but I'm telling you now. And so we understand that there are certain limitations when we are confronted with a character who is talking about himself or herself, because, you know, as you are well aware in your own interactions with human beings, people have blind spots, especially about themselves. They tend not to recognize their own biases and things of that nature. So this happens in fiction, also in nonfiction. But for the most part in fiction, and this is one thing that that Hardy does brilliantly. Okay, so here's a direct characterization sample, and this is from Thomas Hardy's novel, The Mayor of Casterbridge. His measured, springless walk was the walk of the skilled countryman, as distinct from the desultory shamble of the general laborer. While in the turn and plant of each foot, there was further a dogged and cynical indifference personal to himself, showing its presence even in the regularly interchanging fustian folds, now in the left leg, now in the right, as he paced along. Okay, so good deal of information that we're getting there from the narrator. All right, so indirect characterization here, the audience must infer for themselves things about the character via the character's thoughts, the character's actions, speech, so the choice of words, way of talking, looks, and other things that they might care about relative to, does a character wear makeup? Does a character care about how their hair looks? About getting the newest sort of bonnet or hat or suit or pair of shoes or things of that nature, okay? And then interaction with other characters, including other characters' reactions to them. So it's the kind of thing where, and you'll experience this if you're not already in college, when you get to college, the idea that we learn a lot about people, say by looking at the books on their bookshelves, say at looking at the music that they have in playlists they've created on their phones or their musical devices and so forth, the way that they dress, the way they wear their hair, and this sort of thing. Okay, so without the author telling us stuff and giving us information that so informing our opinions, the author presents them sort of in their natural habitat, going about their doings, and then we are then invited to draw our own conclusions. And in a lot of ways, this is the way life works, right? We typically don't have people that sit down and say, okay, this is who I am, and that sort of thing. Okay, all right, so that's it. And if you have any questions, reach out to me and I'll be happy to answer them. Peace.